I have a very simple example of a constellation that I experienced that really stuck with me because of how simple it was. It was a woman who was struggling with procrastination. And you were like, well, that's a fairly mundane thing. You should like look at all the self-help about how to not procrastinate. But she couldn't get over this perpetual procrastination, and it was affecting getting jobs and executing jobs and being, available to her life. And what unfolded was a sense of anger that she experiences internally when she procrastinates and then bumps up against the repercussions of that procrastination. In the constellation that played out, her father had this unresolved, very intense anger that she unknowingly held and then expressed in her own way. It was like these mirrored systems that often unfold without us even realizing that the thing that we're holding is a reflection of some other part or lineage of our family. And what's fascinating to me about how this often happens is that with the acceptance, with acknowledging, it doesn't have to be, oh, dad, this is yours and I'm, at blame, but it's more seeing that, having acceptance for him, having love towards him and the pain that he was carrying allowed her to say, I don't need to hold this for you. I don't need to hold it as a representation of being connected to you. I can be connected to you in a way that is honoring of who you are and the pain you've had, but I can choose to do something differently. And then it began to shift.
It's extraordinary things happen. And, I witnessed and, in disbelief as well on what I said and how it impacted others, having not known any facts, but you just feel it and trusting, not trying to put it through my logical senses of where I could know this. Is this the right thing to say? How are they going to be affected? So if we stop those veils and percolations that our mind tries to bury, we can actually have those synchronicities more often because we're not discounting them. We're not discounting that monkey that walking across the screen among the whites, but that's what it is. And to me, it feels that feeling those qualities when the more we are in that state, which is a happy place, if you wish, the more, which is what people in extreme environments describe. They love it, and when they thrive and everything goes, to plan, it's about excitement to be able to do it.
And I think also that openness, right? When you say like, oh, why does this only happen for other people and not for me? When someone is open to that, their proscenium then opens up. They're open to seeing more patterns, seeing more coincidences. Then they form a yoga studio. Then it's a cult. Different story. But I want to go into kind of a related field that obviously you're an expert in, and it directly relates to born knowing, how children awaken the sacred in everyday parenting. This probably happens to more people than want to admit it or talk about it, for the same reason that the astronauts didn't want to say, I don't know, I just had an intuitive sense. There are reports of people communicating with their babies before the baby is born. I have a hard time with this, but Jonathan would like to tell about what happened in his womb when his then wife was carrying their baby.
This is before conception. You should be talking to the baby spirit. What do you mean?
Oh, I'm sorry.
How do you know what baby to get if you don't send out an application process? But no, I know several people who believe and have experience of dreams, thoughts, a sense, a knowing of that there is a spirit that will come to them as a child and starting to get familiar with that.
So wait, hold on a second. But if I'm going to enter this conversation, what we're talking about is that I'm going to go ahead and go there. There's a field, there's a quantum field, there's a place where information exists, souls exist, consciousness exists, and there are I don't know, souls waiting to be born, and their consciousness exists and they can be communicated. We don't need words. Why would I even care that it's an infant fetus? It doesn't need words. And you can communicate with that because it exists like anyone else's consciousness exists. Is that the idea?
Well, I think back to our conversation with Buddha Betty when she talks about her near-death experience and being in a place where then she saw the choices she made to come back to Earth. And she was in this decision mode. She had technically died, and she was deciding, do I come back to Earth in my current form or do I start again? And she was shown.
She was seeing a place where souls essentially are choosing their bodies, is what she experienced.
I imagine it like there's just all these little portals that have little water slides. And above the water slide, there's like a grid, and we're like, this is the person that you're going to, and this is where they live, and this is what your life might be like. And you're like, I'm going to go down the water slide or not.
But what if there is no time component?
No, there's probably this is another quality to these interactions.
When was your communication, Jonathan, though? And then we'll let Dr. Whiteley explain sort of what her understanding is.
I mean, my communication, I was kind of kicking and screaming with resistance because my then wife was a few years older than me, and she was like, I feel this baby. And I was like, this is not a time for us to have a baby. And so it was like an awareness through her experience more so than me directly. And, but she would talk about like feeling the presence of this this being wanting to arrive.
I have a website that I've created. I was inspired by the website that they have called Last Words. So she's she is a linguist herself, and she's collaborating with Raymond Moody. I don't know if you come across Raymond Moody.
Yeah.
Yes. So she's her experience is that her father was communicating last words, and so he became very lucid and were talking about this divide, of seeing into some other dimension. And so she started collecting. So she made a website and allowed people to submit their stories of when they were having communications with their relatives or whoever they came in contact before they were crossing. And she collects this beautiful book. I highly recommend going either on the website or look at the book called Last Words. And there is a collection of what people experience in terms of what's coming or who is there. And there are things that they would know that they shouldn't have known, if you wish. There were some equally like with the experiences when people considered to be that physically they died, but they, let's say they're, in the experience, I think it was North Carolina where they did the experiments and they put something on top of the cupboards or somewhere else where they could see objects. And so they were somehow had a different perception. But if you look at Dean Radin experiments, it's sort of like, did they know this before? Who was seeing it and when they were seeing it, it's not clear in this time perception aspect. But so that intuited me, or that inspired me to create a website, which is sitting there as an option. It's called childbirthvisions.com. And it's exactly that. What Jonathan is describing is that I started to collect stories. Like there is a little form that people can submit. And there are a few stories that people who submitted were allowing me to share about how they've met the baby or had intuited something about the baby that would come. And how that matched. In some cases, there's no way of, matching it, if you wish, because it's all retrospective. But I'm interested, in people's experiences, because as we know in science, until we have data points, there is nothing we can do. So it's all anecdotes until we have enough data points, that we can explore. So I'm interested in these in similar way, like in Last Words, on what the story how it would unfold through other people's stories. So this is just a placeholder to inspire other people, to report what they experience if it's such so. So there's a few stories to read about it as well.
You've spoken to and worked with astronauts, cosmonauts, pilots. We all know, and if you have seen Age of Disclosure, the new documentary that came out.
Gary Nolan is part of that, and Luis Elizondo.
Who we've spoken to both of them.
We know that there are things that in particular pilots are in certain positions to be able to view in different ways and to track. In terms of your experience working with not just pilots, but people who are traveling to the outer dimensions, right, of kind of our conscious space, are there experiences that astronauts are also possibly afraid to talk about in the same way that they're maybe reticent to talk about intuition or other kinds of perception? Are there things that you have a view of when you are in space that might indicate something about some of these anomalous phenomenon?
So I don't have a report to say, which, me backing out of the direct answer. The reason I end up touching this field and interacting with people like Ryan Graves, who bravely, supporting his colleagues and pilots in America, it's called ASA, so American for Safe Airspace. And initially he started a subgroup of experts in American Institute for Aeronautic and Astronautics, so AISS, and they have a group for UAP outreach, which the whole organization has over 40,000 aviation and airspace professionals, from pilots to engineers, anybody who works in that domain. And he set up a volunteer group. And I also was contributing as a human factors experts to see of what we can, given all the perspectives, because you want to look at an elephant, from all of the perspectives that you can, and all the expertise and tools, indeed. And so we were talking with pilots and trying to understand what they were perceiving, because part of my original training was to discern what is the ghost in the cockpit. That's what people were calling things that were happening with the aircraft, where they couldn't understand why the aircraft changed the mode of operation when the automation came in first. And, we detangled that by being different design philosophy, meaning the engineer thought the plane should fly like this, but the pilot always flew it like this. So the change in logic on how the aircraft changed and what it, vertical speed versus angle of attack and whatnot, when that was become more transparent on why the aircraft was switching from one mode to another, stop having a ghost in the cockpit. But initially they couldn't understand why the modes would switch off, because it will reach an envelope of safety in it, and the pilot would not see that the aircraft is no longer doing what they set it to do. But it started as if pilots don't know what they're doing and what they're seeing, as if they're not trying, as if they're not paying attention. It's clearly a pilot error, but it wasn't. So when this came up and became more prevalent, mostly in the United States, because of the capacity of these brave individuals starting to talk up and not worrying to lose their pilot license, of considering that they're either hallucinating or imagining something, during their work hours, where they should be paying attention. And in actual fact, I wanted to see, what was it? What were they seeing? And so, because if they're seeing something out of the cockpit, and they should be paying attention on landing strip, things in the air that could be coming our way, are there air traffic that is coming in the air? So if they're being distracted, that means I am not safe as a passenger. All of my family is not safe as a passenger. And I know, and we discussed today, if the people are worried about something, they're not paying attention to something else. If they're looking out, or in fact don't want to look or don't want to see an unidentified flying object, they're not going to see other things that they should be seeing. So that, I guess, understanding wanted me to collect anecdotes, which they're called anecdotes, but these are real things that people experience. And the more we can describe them, and I don't know if you come across somebody, a pilot, a helicopter pilot called Jake Barber. So last year in January, late January, he was on News Nation with Ross Coulthart describing his experience of transporting object that he not meant to know what it was. It was just a delivery, picking it up and transporting it. But when he was approaching the object, he felt an overwhelming sense of emotion and he started crying. And he felt a feeling of elation and love. And he was describing it, and you can look at the transcript. It's a feeling of love. And he says like mother, female type of love. And he actually, in that whole experience, he felt that he's not safe to fly. And he was reconsidering whether he should cut the mission short and not do the mission. And I gave a talk at Soul Foundation, which are now being published online, that are coming out sort of in sequence as they happen in November in Italy by, Gary Nolan is the founder. So Jay, I describe that experience and say how important it is for us to live and embody the experience before we share it. Because if we are talking to a person who is likely not believe us or someone that we have to convince, we're going to take out the elements that will make us perceive us less than who we are, or diminish our belief or experience. And because of that, we are missing the data and information of what people experiences in these situations. So Jake Barber was so brave, I would say, to talk about this because he's got the guts, to share exactly what happened. And then other people start to, follow him and say, well, actually, yes, I did feel that, but I didn't feel it's manly to share that this elation and this feeling that he felt disabling, but actually later after that experience, it was empowering. So it's now empowering him to do, his, goal, mission, purpose, what he does. And he is in a way diving into that dimension. And what we're touching is love again, we're touching those qualities that the best he can explain. And the idea is to let that be part of the data, part of those experiences, part of the state that we may need to come into in order to have those extrasensory perceptions. So I don't know, I'm open to possibilities. And I think have the experiences, dive in yourself, before I, would judge. I would go and see if I can tap into it, feel it.
We've heard you describe astronaut eye, where people are seeing flashes, streaks, clouds, sometimes with their eyes closed. Can you describe what you've heard?
So this was a phenomena that was experienced by astronauts early on. And so they were not talking about this because they would be considered hallucinations, or that they would be medically unfit to fly, or they will, cut their mission short. And people in safety critical profession, they are very careful in what they report, even if it's pain, that they're going through. For example, there's a big problem of shoulder dislocation during pool training that they do to prepare for extravehicular activity. So where they wear the extravehicular activity suit in the pool, where they're training the procedure of what they do in space in microgravity. But what happens in the pool, they are not floating in the suit as they would in space. They're still working against the medium, of water. So the suit sits differently, and it affects the joints. And so some of them have injuries, but they would not report it pre-flight because they don't want to be, and also they don't want to be not perform in the pool. So and it is, like, but once they start reporting, the problem can be solved. So similarly here, until the astronauts were happy enough to talk among themselves about these flashes that they were experiencing in when they had their eyes open or closed, they didn't raise this, because it was then, I'm not the only one. So this is it, it's like, how can we share safely to the all expansiveness or all the spectra of all of those sensory perception or intuition or coincidences? How can we not even discount the time? When do we say that it relates to this episode or it doesn't? How can we also consider time component to be part of it, not just an instant? Because a lot of this UAP and phenomena to do with encountering other life forms, or how people interpret or even faith-related experiences, is that they're not always connected in one single moment. It makes sense looking at that they had other experiences that once they put together, they make sense, but they don't make sense on their own. But it's almost like building up the person to make a story. So the story is being written not in the moment, but across lifetime. So these astronauts, when they talked to each other, then started to look into what happened, and it was cosmic radiation that was actually hitting the retina that created that flash. So there was not flashes that were mysterious, but once we have enough data and we are brave enough to describe all the spectra, then we can dive in to see what it might be. So, even if it's, we don't have to boil it down to science and take the, belief and faith and love out of it, but we need to be brave to explore the whole spectra and not take out the things that we think the other person would not understand or would not consider it important. Everything is important when we're exploring. So every detail has a significance, just like when we are, meeting somebody for the first time, or making a decision on a life partner, or, on a job interview, whether we want or not want to spend time with these people. And if there's this, gut sense or something is not right, it's worth investigating and exploring that and not discounting it outright. There's something in there.